Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. And today's subject is, it's a particularly sensitive topic, especially anymore with the advent of the internet and everybody being able to have access to their own platform and soapbox and able to broadcast their thoughts to the wider world. It can be a little bit tense, and the subject is politics in games. Now, some of you may already be groaning. Some of you may already be reaching to tune out and go over to something else. I'd ask you to just stay and listen for just a few moments, though. I'm not here to beat anybody over the head with my own particular viewpoints, talking points, whatever, my own political alignments and orientations and all of that. I'm here more to talk about what to do when it comes to politics in games, because this could very easily and very probably may end up being a tableside chats kind of video, but I still think this is useful as a DM guide because you will encounter this in some form or fashion as you play. Because I've met and talked to many people who say things like, I like to leave politics aside. I want to escape from all that real world stuff. I want to instead just enjoy a non-political game like Cyberpunk, which has nothing to say on the corporate landscape and the loss of control by regular governments and the ability to do on and on and on. People who say the Metal Gear Solid games. I've met people who say the Metal Gear Solid games have nothing political to say at all. And that is ludicrous to the extreme. But the thing is that when it comes to games, any entertainment media really, but any game that you might be playing or running for your players, for the purposes on the subjects for this channel, politics are going to be involved to some degree. It's an inescapable fact. I mean, Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, we're in a fantasy setting, fantasy world, right? Completely divorced from anything that we might build our lives around. Well, no, it's a Western-styled fantasy sort of game, and I mean Western in, like Western Europe, little incorporations of medieval or Eastern Europe, and then if you go down to Kalimshan, if you're playing 5th edition in Faerun, you're looking at a more of a Middle Eastern kind of a feel to things somewhat. But the point is that there are power structures in place for these games. We have kings, emperors, lords, merchants, businesses, trade routes moving through harbors, mayors, local municipalities, law enforcement, taxation. All of these things are highly politically charged topics, especially, in the real world. But they exist in these games because there's a power structure. Now, some people may still try to opt to ignore that somewhat, but the thing is that the power structure is where you're going to find the money. A king who may not be able to mobilize all their forces because mobilization of their forces means their neighbors are going to notice that they're mobilizing forces, so they get their forces prepared to mobilize. They can't exactly afford to have that kind of escalation happening because of all the political implications that come with it. And so they can't rapidly or decisively deal with a particular threat. So what do? They post bounties, rewards, bring in adventurers, mercenaries, people who are disposable but effective, especially if they get rid of the problem. If they can get rid of the problem, then hey, gold well spent. They averted any sort of escalation or an increase of crises, or if things are already escalating between their neighbors, but they have these threats in their home territory that need to be dealt with, well, they can't exactly pull soldiers from the front line, so they hire adventurers. They hire an adventuring party to go and deal with these problems. And that right there, you're already involving politics, quite a bit actually, and in a way that makes sense. But it's also, importantly, in a way that's not beating people over the heads with the fact that this is a whole a political thing. It's there. It's the backdrop. It's the motivation. It's the who's, what's, why's, when's, where's, and how's. All of those important questions that help to make a setting feel that much more alive. So that's why I tend to lean into these kinds of things, if you can't already guess from the way I'm describing everything. And I'm a massive history nerd. I'm going to school for it, earning my degree in it, in history, and just all kinds of history. Honestly, it's all fascinating stuff. But history deals with politics, just because politics is a part of history. And politics are informed by culture, cultural norms and mores, and how what's considered taboo, what's considered all right. All of that goes on to inform politics. Everything cultural does. Religion goes on to inform politics, interacts with politics, and sometimes, actually a lot of the time, reinforces politics. Especially if you're dealing with anything in the medieval period. And we're in a fantasy setting where gods are known and proven to exist. And they have clerics and paladins going out there and spreading the word and the gospel and all of that. Proselytizing, waging war on behalf of their deities, gaining converts on behalf of their deities, smiting enemies in the name of their deities. That has huge political ramifications. But some people still opt to try to ignore that, and I don't really know that you can. Not if you want to tell a more in-depth and engaging story. Certainly, like I said, presumably you're playing games with your friends, or if you're not with your friends, you're out with, you're out at some kind of a hobby gaming store or spot that will allow you to game, and you're gaming with other like-minded people, strangers maybe, or acquaintances, but you don't want to just offend them and piss them off just by being an absolute jerk about something because you want to use the game to make a point. The idea is you want to lean into it and embrace it and utilize it as another tool for telling a more engaging story, for making the world feel just so much more alive for your players. I mean, on the subject of cyberpunk, Shadowrun, which is very much cyberpunk and is, leaning right into that dystopia, mega corporations running the world, that is all about politics. I mean, hiring teams of Shadowrunners, people who live in legal gray areas to go out and conduct corporate espionage, assassinations, and extractions, and bringing high-value personnel from one corporation to another. I mean, that's all kinds of politically charged, but it's awesome. It's an awesome setting that's easy to get yourself lost in. Absolutely incredible. But it's only possible by leaning into it and embracing it. So my advice would be lean into it, embrace it, use it. It's another tool in your tool belt. Don't be afraid of it, but also don't just beat people in the face with your particular viewpoints. I mean, presumably if you're friends, you have these discussions at some point with some kind of irregularity anyways. I mean, again, I know I certainly do, but again, I also talk a lot about history and give a breakdown and analysis on different things, which also again comes back around to reinforcing how I build my worlds. That's because for so many years now, I've studied the cause and effect of different events. I mean, gosh, even if you were to take a look at a game like Final Fantasy Tactics. Final Fantasy Tactics is a fantastic game, really engaging, really incredible story of intrigue. But that intrigue's only possible because of the power structure that's in place. Two feuding noble families, the most powerful noble families in Ivalice, that go to war with one another. But you find out that war is being manipulated. Spoilers, by the way. Ignore, skip ahead. I'm not sure how far. I'll figure that out in a minute. But the war is being manipulated. Both sides are being pushed and prodded at by the church. The church wants both sides to just tear each other apart, create mass destruction, death, misery, and chaos, So that way they can be the shining beacon of light and hope and assume a greater position of control and power. They want to be that force of reason, that stability that all the poor, abused masses can flee to, find protection under the aegis of the Glabados Church. And, it's a plot that just about damn near works. I mean, Goltana, Ramza's older brothers, the two sides there, the White Lion and the Black Lion, they tear each other to pieces. I mean, it's, oh gosh, what a great game. But yeah, it's a political plot. The church using its power and position to manipulate the two most powerful noble houses into warring with one another so that they can assume greater control. I mean, no way that's political, right? It is, though. It is. And it makes for a damn good story in the process. I mean, there's no reason to not lean into it, so long as you're not being a jerk about it, which, aside from rule 0, that's probably the number one rule. Don't be a dick. Don't be a jerk. I mean, you're playing a game with your friends. Hopefully you're not just being a jerk for no reason to make a point like that. Yeah, I mean, I could wax on and start talking in circles, and there's so many incredible political situations from our own history that you can use to help inform your games. Absolutely incredible things like the lead up to the Sengoku Jidai. The start of it was a fight, if I remember right, between two clans in Japan. It was the Hosokawa and the Yamana clans. They were the two most powerful clans in Japan at the time, serving under the emperor and everything, and they under the shogunate, but they went to war with one another, and nobody could really do anything to stop it. And once they destroyed one another, essentially, they weakened each other enough to where a lot of other rivals went, think we see a chance here now. And basically everybody went for broke and just fractured the island nation of Japan into something like 890, 100 or so feuding fiefdoms for almost 100 years, give or take. I mean, that's an incredible story right there. A lot of people assume, oh goodness, I'm starting to overthink and generalize things a little bit, but essentially these two clans were major pillars in the power structure, and once they took each other out, everything collapsed beneath them. I mean, the emperor is essentially a religious figurehead for the Japan, and the shogun was really the one that held power, but the shogunate had no ability to stop these two clans from going at one another, and that's what caused that massive failure there. Everything collapsed once these two major pillars of support took each other out, because there's nothing else restraining everybody else. And you can see this repeat throughout so many other points of history. And it's a massively political thing. It's very, very much political. It's all these intricacies. The main central core of power, or what's supposed to be, not able to restrain those that are supposed to be supporting it and are under, different oaths and pledges of allegiance and everything. So, yeah, you can draw in all these different things, but bear in mind, at the end of the day, it's going to reflect in politics somehow. I mean, like I said, Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, Rollmaster, whatever game you might be playing, if you have kings, queens, lords, tax collectors, sheriffs, any kind of law enforcement like that, those are all inherently part of political power structures. And if they're not there, there's a reason for it. And it's a reason that will ultimately be a cultural one, and culture informs politics. So all of that ties together. It spiderwebs out in actually kind of a beautiful way when you step back and look at it and, divorce yourself for a moment from whatever your own leanings and thoughts might be. You can see how it all starts to work and kind of fits together. And you can also see how to start taking it all apart bit by bit to make these different interesting stories. I mean, consistently, one of the greatest failings in history of most leaders is the failure to hand over any power to anybody else, or to properly train up a successor. Like, take Otto von Bismarck. He was one of the main political advisors to Kaiser Wilhelm, and he did not have a successor in place, or at least not one that was trained up to be as brilliant as he was. And definitely read up on the man or research him a little bit on YouTube. There's certainly some great sources out there. But the man was a brilliant political mind. He understood warfare's place within the political power structure and was able to use it, and also understood when he really needed to rein that side of things in. That military arm is, the military is a political, part of a political, it's the political arm of, it's basically, it's the muscle behind politics, essentially. I mean, that might be a crude way of putting it, but it's no less accurate for however simplified it might be. But, Otto von Bismarck was able to utilize the military to foment the creation of Germany in the defeat of the French. And he held them back from conquering all of France because France was still one of the major land powers. Sure, they had just lost, but they were a major land power in Europe still, and they still had colonies through different parts of the globe on different continents. And in securing the defeat of the French, but keeping them from being annihilated, he was able to leverage them into recognizing the formation of a German state. And because they had the acknowledgement and essentially a legal backing from another major European land power, there wasn't a whole lot the other nations in Western Europe could do to stop it. There wasn't anything the Russians could do, the English, the Dutch, any of these other powers that existed in Europe at the time, because the French signed off on it, and the French were still a massive land power, the major land power, and they had just been beaten by the Germans. So you're going to really pick a fight with two of the most powerful military and political forces in Europe? Not going to happen. But there I go again, talking about history and politics, but these are still incredibly useful tools that you can make use of. And these are incredible stories that you can use to enhance and enrich your own stories. And I encourage you so much to do so. But before I ramble on more, we're going to go ahead and cut it there. I hope that this has been useful for you, somewhat entertaining, if nothing else, engaging and informative. If you did like today's video, well then go on down there, hit the like button, let me know in the comments down below. I know it's a sensitive, touchy subject, but I hope I've put it across in a way that's digestible for everybody, comfortable to watch, even if it might be a little bit dicey here or there, pardon the pun. If you didn't like the video, though, still, hit the dislike button. Let me know your thoughts. Certainly, my delivery and perspective are not going to cover the full spectrum of every human experience out there, but I do try. But if you're wanting to see more, then good news, there are two videos over here for you. One is something Google has decided you will enjoy. The other is something I've put out recently. But if this has not been your first stop here at the Gamer's Den, well then, go on down there, hit the subscribe button. Certainly you seem to be enjoying something, and we would be happy to have you. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all for your time, and have a good night.